Okay, we're going to move on now into Chapter 5 in your textbook, which covers the integumentary system. The integumentary system is your skin. The skin can also be called the integument. That's another name for skin. And as we heard on one of the Chapter 4 video clips, the skin can also be called a cutaneous membrane because it is functioning as a separation or a barrier between the inside of the body and the outside of the body. All right. Bring up my pen here. Okay, so your skin or integument, again, that's going to be the subject of this chapter, and there's a lot of new terminology here once again. So we're going to, I'm going to go over quite a bit of this actually in the physiology section and also in the anatomy section for Unit 2. It's kind of hard for me to talk about the physiology without also at least reviewing some of this terminology and where things are located. So we'll hit this a couple of times, probably won't hurt. The skin, it can be divided up into 3 major regions, and these are all new terms you certainly want to learn. You have the epidermis, the superficial region of the skin at the surface. Then you have the dermis, that's the middle region of the skin. And then finally, if you go down a little bit deeper, then you're into the hypodermis. Now keep in mind, when we're thinking about the skin, we're thinking at a microscopic level. All 3 of these layers together are not all that thick, especially the epidermis and the dermis. You're probably looking at like the width of a piece of paper for both of those. The hypodermis is the fatty layer underneath the skin, so of course that can actually be quite a bit thicker, and that's going to fill up the space that you have between the skin and your underlying muscles. The hypodermis is sometimes also called the subcutaneous layer. You'll see that term as well. Sub meaning beneath, cutaneous refers to the skin. It's a cutaneous membrane, as we talked about in Chapter 4. So the hypodermis can sometimes be referred to as the subcutaneous layer. You'll see both of those as well. Hypodermis is sometimes also referred to as superficial fascia. You might have heard of somebody before who has plantar fasciitis on the sole of their foot. Fascia includes connective tissues between the skin and muscle. So the hypodermis consists of connective tissues, including the fat cells that are there. Remember your adipose tissues from Chapter 4, that is a type of a connective tissue. It's a type of loose connective tissue. So some of the other connective tissues woven in through there are considered to be fascia, and then you have deeper fascia that is in direct contact with the muscles themselves. So the fascia will include these connective tissues between the skin and the underlying muscle. Alright, the hypodermis though is mostly composed of adipose tissue surrounded by some loose connective tissue and then also some denser connective tissues as you approach the muscles underneath. Alright, here's our good old skin chunk diagram. This will become very familiar to us as we move through Chapter 5. Change my pen color here. Okay, so on our diagram here, this uppermost layer represented in brown is the epidermis. Again, that's microscopically thin. The whole pink area you see here is the dermis. And the dermis is the location where you see what we call accessory structures or appendages of the skin. Things like your hair follicles that you see right there. This is a type of sweat gland that we'll talk about. Little yellow objects you see right in there. Those are going to be covered more so on your Unit 2 anatomy videos. We'll talk about those in more detail there. Those are actually nervous system structures located in the skin. All the little yellow fibers you see there are are nerves that are involved in things like pain sensation, heat sensation, and of course you got blood vessels running through there, oil producing glands over here and over here. So all of those different things are skin accessory structures or appendages that have various roles, and they're all sitting there in the dermis layer of the skin. And then if you go below there, down deeper, moving toward the underlying skeletal muscle, that's going to be your hypodermis, which can also be called superficial fascia. Alright, so that's just kind of a quick introduction to the three. Alright, well let me back up there for a second. Some people, if you ask, well, how many layers of the skin are there, they'll tell you three. You've got the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. Other people will say two. They'll tell you that only the epidermis and the dermis are truly major layers of the skin, and the hypodermis is technically its own little thing there, sitting between the skin and the underlying muscle. So, you know, even anatomists may argue back and forth about that one. Don't stress out over that too much. I generally refer to the two major layers of the skin, and if I ask you, name the two major layers of the skin, epidermis and dermis. So just keep that in mind. Our next little video clip, we're going to zoom in on the epidermis and talk about the epidermis in more detail.